Okay, we're ready to get started with our webinar, Presenting Data, Crafting Compelling Stories with Data. Hello, my name is Nicole Stephan. I'm with the Western States Art Federation. For anyone not familiar with WESTAF, we are an art service organization and we provide technology platforms for the arts. I am the director of the Creative Vitality Suite, CVSuite for short, which is one of WESTAF's technology products offering creative economy data. With me today is Oregon-based arts and culture consultant Chris Darcy. She will review best practices for creating visuals and narratives with data. All right, to review, this is the third of a three-part webinar series concerned with data related to the arts and the broader creative economy. The first webinar, Why Data, centered on key things that every arts and creative economy administrator needs to know in order to make use of available data. The second webinar, Which Data, sorted through by comparing and contrasting the arts and creative economy data projects that are currently underway. And today, for the third webinar, Presenting Data, we will show ways to best put your creative economy data to work, how to present to specific audiences by integrating qualitative and quantitative data and best practices for effectively blending narratives and visuals. This webinar will be approximately 45 minutes in length. Following the presentation, we will have time for questions. Please note that the way for you to ask questions is to enter them into the chat box. It's worth knowing also that the chat box is not available if you are in full screen. We will answer those questions at the end of the presentation. Also, just to go over what the purpose of this webinar series is, the webinar was prepared because after talking with a number of practitioners in the arts field, we became aware of the fact that although many arts leaders are interested in finding ways to put data to work in support of their efforts, they are sometimes overwhelmed and even confused by all the data available in the field today. In addition, they often do not know what to do with the data they already have access to. One reason data is increasingly available in the field is that technology has made the collection, cleaning, organization, and the computation of data more feasible than ever. Advances in technology have flooded the world at large with data, and now it is the turn of the arts and culture sector to enjoy this wealth of data or be terrified by it. I want to note that if you are challenged by the amount of data in the arts and creative economy field today, have difficulty articulating the difference between data sets and data project offerings, or are just not great with numbers, you are not alone. Remember, in our field, a number of effective administrators enter their positions without any formal education in the area of statistics and data. The root experience of a large number of administrators in the sector are individuals with degrees in the performing and visual arts, areas whose traditional course of study does not include much attention to data. So if you are puzzled by the avalanche of data, you are one of many. If you have experience with data and statistics, consider yourself fortunate. You can help others understand how to best use the rising tide of arts and creative economy data. All right, so getting started, I want to ask Chris Darcy, who has worked extensively in the arts as a state director, to share some of her experiences of leveraging data to craft compelling arguments.
I became the director of the Oregon Arts Commission soon after the commission was moved into the state's Economic Development Department. We looked for ways to discuss our work in ways that related to the overall mission of the department, primarily economic impact. While we undertook some major economic impact studies, they really didn't make a difference in how we were perceived, and the studies never fully captured the diversity and richness of Oregon's creative economy, which includes some of the global giants of design like Nike. When our colleagues at WESTAF and the Washington State Arts Commission developed the Creative Vitality Index, which later became the CVSuite, we were excited to see how we could use it in Oregon. It was the first tool that enabled us to point out that small towns with high quality of life factors were centers for creative activity. Places like Ashland in southern Oregon and Hood River in the Columbia River Gorge. Ashland's home to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, the largest regional theater in the U.S., so it was no surprise that artists of all kinds live in and around that community and contribute to the artistic product of the festival. We had a feeling that the CV data would show that Hood River, a riverport city once surrounded by fruit orchards, have become home to outdoor gear and apparel companies, which need designers to thrive, and the data substantiated that. I'll talk more about that later. It gave us data for specific locations that could be targeted for messaging to key decision makers, in our case, legislators, who turned out to be proud that clean, innovative, creative businesses were adding jobs and bringing money into their districts, which once had been dominated by a forest product economy. When it became clear that a legislator from Columbia County outside Portland would be a key decision maker on state funding issues, we used CV data to tell the story of Michael Curry Design in Scappoose, Oregon. Curry, trained as a fine artist, has built an international reputation as a production designer, working with the world's foremost entertainment companies like Disney, Cirque du Soleil, and the Olympic Committee to create exhilarating performance experiences for global audiences. He's become one of the largest employers in Columbia County, surrounding himself with a core team of 50 artists and technicians at a studio outside Portland. It was fun to be able to put a face on the data, profiling unexpected creatives and companies with a narrative about the interconnection between the nonprofit arts community and the broader community of creative businesses that generate Oregon's creative economy. As a result, we've seen some small creative companies recognized by our business development department for their appeal to international markets and innovation, the same companies who employ artists and have design at the core of their product development. One of my favorites is Egg Press, a letterpress in Portland whose products are popular in the Japanese market because they're quirky, they have design flair, and really handmade qualities.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. It really seems like your time as an Oregon State Director exposed you to a breadth of paths that creatives have taken to become economically sustainable while pursuing their passions. Thank you for sharing your insights. I'm really excited that you're here today to talk about your knowledge firsthand. To get started, I'd like to outline the different aspects we're going to cover in the webinar today regarding presenting data. We'll look at 5 aspects that fit into 2 categories. It's worth noting that these are listed out kind of like steps, but it's not necessary to take these in order. This process often requires revisiting certain things more than once. So creating a compelling story is the first category that we'll focus on. Chris will do this by diving into some of the cases she just outlined in greater detail to provide a little insight into how she built these narratives. She'll explain case studies by reviewing how to define objectives, identify audience types, and craft a narrative. The second category is about supporting the story with data and developing materials. I'll show you how to identify compelling data points, create visuals, and show a few approaches for distributing materials. Let's take a closer look at these 5 aspects of presenting data before Chris dives into her first case. First, we will revisit the importance of defining an objective. We covered this subject in Webinar 1, Why Data, and it will help us in the process of presenting our data. If you'd like to take a look at Webinar 1, we'll provide a link to it when we send the slides for this webinar. There are a handful of potential objectives that we will consider that will help agencies better understand how to focus their story. These objectives are to define and measure who are you and what can you claim about yourself and your organization. Compare. We use data to compare competing entities. This could be comparisons with other industries in the region or with other creative industries outside of your area. Demonstrate. Identify the strengths and weaknesses of occupations and industries. To plan. Data can be used for planning, especially to investigate past performance and identify trends. Moving on, after you define your objective, is defining your target audience. Audience types and objectives go hand in hand. In the arts, we commonly need to prove our case following 3 types of audiences: the Economic Development Office, donors and community members, and regional stakeholders. Crafting a narrative. Now we need to craft a narrative fit for who we are presenting to and what our objective aims to accomplish. Is our goal to show our local Economic Development Office that we need to be included in their 5-year plan? Maybe this would best be approached by reviewing a cluster of industries and speaking about their past and potential growth. Or maybe we're selling our impact to internal stakeholders and need to show the current size and scope of what we can accomplish with the increase of funding that we're asking for. This type of impact may be best illustrated through highlighting individual businesses or artists and showing how they fit into the broader creative economy of your region. Then we'll move on and look at identifying supporting data. This can be challenging to find the right data to support your narrative. Once again, like defining your objective, this process is not as simple as following a few steps in order. In many instances, discoveries are made when looking at the data that end up changing or expanding the narrative. There is no one system for driving forward the creation of the correct story. It is a cyclical process, and often research opens up doorways to new questions. As we reviewed in Webinar 2, there are many reliable sources for creative economy data. In some instances, you may only need data regarding nonprofit activity, and in others, you might need a mix of nonprofit, labor market, and local surveys. It's important to allow time to investigate potential sources and then evaluate the validity of what you find. It is essential to return to the first few aspects we just discussed, who you are presenting to, and ask, does the narrative provide evidence of impact while putting an easy-to-understand face on the numbers? And then finally, it's the consideration of what types of materials to produce that will best share your narrative. Is your audience more interested in a printed report, or a research page, or a Prezi? Will they respond if you lead with the hard facts as told through a report showing mostly numbers? Or will they be more engaged by a well-told story with compelling images of a struggling artist making their way to financial independence? Turn things over to Chris, who will review 2 case studies from Oregon and step through creating a compelling story for each study. She'll cover defining objectives, audience types, and crafting a narrative. Then I will take it over and show how to support the narrative with data and develop visuals and materials. Our goal is for organizations to better understand the breadth of questions to ask and some of the potential paths for walking towards presenting a compelling case for your region's creative. Chris, I'd like to turn it over to you to look at our first case study, which is about Oregon's fashion and outdoor apparel industry.
Thanks, Nicole. Our first case study from Oregon looks at employment in the apparel design arena. A lot of people think of fashion as designed in major centers like New York or LA, but a lot of what people wear outdoors is actually designed in Oregon. That's not surprising considering that Oregon has a broad industry cluster of outdoor gear and apparel that makes sense considering that we're home to global giants like Nike and Columbia Sportswear and many more smaller companies that have been spawned by the large ones. And we're not just talking about fashion for people. Roughwear and Bend is one of the leading gear designers and makers for dogs. Business Oregon, the state's economic development department, has identified outdoor gear and apparel design as one of Oregon's leading clusters for development. As the home of footwear and apparel giants like Nike, Columbia Sportswear, Keen, and Adidas, it's not surprising that a healthy ecosystem of new companies designing and creating wearable products called Portland home. And as we looked at the CV data, we could see that there was increased apparel design employment in areas outside Portland, in places where designers could be closer to the natural areas where their designs would meet the environment. Places like the Columbia River Gorge, the only designated national scenic area in the United States, where coincidentally the wind velocity fuels an international windsurfing community. So in recent years, a startup ecosystem has emerged to support new companies, including education options, like at Portland State University, Pensol Footwear Design Academy, the University of Oregon, and Portland Sewing, financing options like Broad Peak and Mercy Corps Northwest, and a business accelerator, the Portland Apparel Lab. We could actually see that some of these companies were moving to Oregon, and specifically the Columbia River Gorge, to be closer to the natural forces that their gear responds to. And because their designers and employees place a high value in being closer to the landscapes and conditions they draw inspiration from. So to summarize this first case, our objective was to connect the story of the apparel designers in Oregon to the larger business story of that business cluster. Our target audience was state legislators and business and economic development leaders. We looked at this industry from the high level, considering supply chain and the potential for growth because of the existing infrastructure. We framed this in terms of economic development, as this industry is a multiplier in Portland. In terms of crafting narrative, the narrative focuses on the outdoor apparel industry cluster and a group of high-growth companies that seeded the development of the rest of the cluster. It reviews the case for creativity as essential for global competitiveness, and it leverages the triple bottom-line business model, as many of these designers and manufacturers are using recycled or sustainably sourced goods, which are also a key component to Oregon's green brand. In terms of data, We did our research and found several key data points about jobs and job growth. We saw significant increases in fashion, commercial, industrial, and graphic design employment that supported the narrative. In terms of impact, the smaller and innovative apparel design firms and their creative employees are now being profiled in regional business journals, and there's wider recognition that a company needs a combination of top-notch designers and high-performance products to be truly competitive worldwide. That's led into a discussion about the need for quality art and design education in order to fuel the industry as a whole. Our second case study looks at in Central Oregon, where a coalition of over 30 arts and culture organizations formed to more strategically promote the arts and establish a collective voice for increased recognition and hopefully resources. One of their early goals was to demonstrate their value to the broad community and to quantify their economic impact in the region. Using data measuring the health of their nonprofit groups, they demonstrated that they collectively spend over $16 million a year. And more than 1 million arts and culture experiences were generated by these organizations, ranging from participating in an art class or a workshop, or attending a lecture or an exhibition, or a performance at one of the area's destination outdoor venues. Using that data, the coalition cultivated and developed a relationship with Visit Bend, the regional tourism marketing entity, and proposed an increase to the hotel-motel tax to benefit, in part, their coalition. The room tax increase effort succeeded and gave the coalition more credibility. So now, known as the Arts and Culture Alliance, the group, in partnership with Visit Bend, uses the new funds to offer competitive cultural tourism grants to cultural groups to help diversify Bend's tourism offerings and attract incremental tourists to Bend during the shoulder seasons and winter months. It all began with a look at the data, which in essence showed that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. As a coalition, the broad group had more concentrated visibility than its members working individually or as a smaller subset. That increased visibility led to further discussions about how the arts and culture sector might contribute to increasing Bend's appeal to attract new long-term investment. The regional economy relied on forest products for many years. Now tourism is a large driver. And the coalition's conversations had been based until then on the nonprofit sector, not the region's overall creative sector. So a second phase began to create a regional creative economy action plan. And this time the discussion moved beyond area tourism leaders and included the Central Oregon Regional Solutions Advisory Committee, another coalition of community and elected leaders, plus state and federal agencies who collaborate on solutions to problems or issues no single entity can address. Starting at the local level to identify priorities, each team works from the bottom up to solve problems and finish projects. In Oregon, this work runs out of the governor's office, so it can be a powerful pipeline for action when it works. In 2015, Central Oregon broke new ground when it became the only regional solutions center in the state to set arts and culture as an economic priority for its region. So arts and culture now rubs shoulders with other priorities such as higher ed and improving affordable housing and transportation. The Creative Economy Action Planning process is underway now, and again, data collection and analysis is at its core, starting with measuring current employment in the arts. The ultimate goal of the project is to identify action steps to increase arts employment, as well as to identify how those jobs might lead to the creation of other jobs outside the arts. So the questions they're looking at include, how can Bend enhance the arts organizations that will serve as a springboard to other economic development? And how does a vibrant arts community contribute to the region being attractive to people who can live and work anywhere? The goal is to have the consultant report and recommendations from the data analysis complete in September. So to summarize this case, the objectives were to increase the awareness of and ultimately investment in Central Oregon arts and culture sector. Target audiences started internally in terms of identifying and forming a coalition. The coalition looked at regional tourism leaders as potential allies, then turned to regional economic and public sector leaders for their current phase of planning. And using data about spending and the public benefit of their programming, they secured increased bed tax dollars and invested those funds to bring new visitors to Bend during off-peak seasons. Then they used their higher visibility to get a place at the most influential regional economic development table. This is still a work in progress, but a great example of how forming strategic alliances and using collective data and information can advance and sustain an agenda.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris, for sharing all of your experience. I think our audience will really benefit from those case studies. So now we're going to move on to the final part of our webinar, which will give you an overview of selecting data and creating visuals to engage audiences. We'll also review producing materials and sharing them. This is a very extensive topic that could be a webinar in and of itself. So let's get started by looking at mapping, which is one way that you can visualize your data. Mapping is a valuable approach to sharing data. Maps can be static, as in an image, or they can be interactive, embedded into a research page, for example. There are platforms that exist to help organizations to organize their data for maps. Will also save you from having to hire a costly geographic information system specialist. One of those platforms, as you see on the screen here, is CartoDB. It allows for mapping and analyzing data, then provides an interactive map that you can make accessible on your website. A few other systems that are similar to this are Esri StoryMap and Google Maps. We'll send around a link to a blog post that we have that will provide you with more information on these tools. It's important to keep in mind that not all data can be mapped. Those data that can be mapped offer to provide insights that leave an impact on their viewer. Some important things to consider when mapping are: how does a map help to meet my objective? In some instances, seeing data on a map dramatically changes the story being told. One such case is per capita figures. For example, maybe you need to show how grants are distributed in your state by county. You could do this by mapping the grant award amount in each county and show it as a chloropleth, which is what we see in map number 1 here. A chloropleth is a mapping term which means using color gradients to show concentration. The darker the color, the more grant awards there were. We see in map 1 that there isn't much variation, just one region in the upper right that seems to have a high award amount, surrounded by other regions that received considerably less grant dollars. This is common when mapping by actual value, as urban areas tend to have higher values because they have a higher population. Map 2 shows the same data mapped by per capita award amount. In this instance, you might see that your more rural county actually has a higher concentration of grant dollars than the urban counties in your state. You wouldn't know this unless you map them by per capita values. Now we'll take a look at which data or data points do you want to map to best support your narrative. Let's look at the case of plotting data as a dot on the map. When is this a good approach? How do you do this well? Here in map 1, we are showing data mapped by address, and it appears as hundreds of dots on a map. Sometimes these dots are color-coded by discipline, for example. Really, all that can be understood is that there's a lot of activity in a region. Nothing really has a priority. In design, we refer to this as hierarchy. If we change this, as we see in map 2, to show groupings of data points, we begin to see which regions have the highest concentration. This is indicated by the large numbers inside of the circles that demonstrate size. This clues the viewer into just how dense an activity is in a given area. It also allows the user to zoom in and learn more when they view a region in greater detail. So some important questions to ask about mapping and when it's the right approach. Would it be compelling to compare regions on a map? Can all the data we have be grouped geographically? For example, does it have an address, zip code, or county associated with it? And how important is the geographic aspect of the narrative? Next, let's move on and take a look at the visualization of data. Some data are best displayed as visuals rather than being added into the body of a written report. In many instances, presenting key figures in a visual, say a bar graph, will draw the reader in to investigate the supporting table and narrative. There are many ways to display data in a visual way. Here on the screen, we see a few different approaches. A bar chart, a pictograph, a pie chart, and then on the bottom, a tree map, and also a line chart. to create meaningful graphics, there are a few important questions to ask. First, the question that I ask would be, what is most compelling about my data? Maybe it's actually not a positive story, but proves that you need more funding to bolster certain industries. For example, if your goal is to show creative occupations with the greatest impact, you can approach this in several ways. In graph 1, we look at the total number of jobs, around 119,000, and can see that we are experiencing growth, especially between 2010 to 2011. Then we look at the table below it and see what the top 5 occupations are. Great, this is interesting, and we know which occupations have a lot of jobs. So we're halfway to serving our objective. When we take it further and ask how this compares to creative occupations, we use a different visual, the pie chart in number 2, which shows the impact of occupations with the most workers. We see that over half of the creative jobs are attributed to those top 5 occupations. Combining the visuals in 1 and 2 provides more insight about impact and presents the data in a more compelling way. Next, a good question to ask is, which visuals will best support my objective? One common issue with creating visuals is creating too many of them with data that do not tell a compelling story. Oftentimes people assume that all available data points in a data set should be shown on a graph. In this example, this pie chart, what we see is that we're looking at percent of the total earnings of each of the 72 creative industries in the CVSuite. Showing all this data ends up detracting from proving your objective. It creates a lot of distraction without actually providing valuable information. Each industry has its own color, which makes for a very large key that you can't actually even see on this page. There's five pages of the key. Many of the industries on the pie chart are also so small that it's difficult to see them. Let's take a look at the revised version. Here we see the same data grouped by discipline to craft a narrative. There are 4 main disciplines that have subcategories. The pie chart shows the distribution of their percentages, while next to each subcategory we see actual values. A benefit of grouping data is that you can directly label the pie chart instead of creating a legend. Choosing specific aspects of the data to display allows you to clearly communicate specific data points that support your objective. So let's take a look at how to make a graphic easier to understand. Information design thought leader Edward Tufte has a concept called the data to ink ratio. That is how much of the area is actually data versus the chart junk used to showcase it. Here we see a chart on the left that's straight out of Excel. It has a dark background with some highly contrasted colors for the lines on the graph. There are a few other issues with how the X and Y axes are labeled that make it harder to read the graph. On the right is the same chart that has been cleaned up a little using a plugin for Excel. The X and Y axes have been simplified, which makes the data larger, and a specific line on the graph has been designated as the focus in blue. I know one challenge that many people face is the limited access to tools to make custom visuals or to the skills to use them. With that in mind, we'll send around a link following the webinar that provides you with information on how to add this plugin to Excel and a few more tips and tricks for cleaning up your charts. So here's a few questions you can ask regarding charts and graphs and determining if it's the right approach. What is compelling about my data? What visuals will best support my objective? How can I make this graphic easier to understand? And is this the appropriate visual for the audience I'm trying to reach? So now we're going to take a look at the best way to reach your audience with the right materials distributed in the right way. First, we're going to take a look here at some reports. Many organizations produce printed reports that they then deliver via mail or PDF. This type of media has benefits and is a reliable approach for those preferring a little more of a direct exchange of information with stakeholders. Some audience types may feel most comfortable with substantial reports they can thumb through. The downside to this approach are the cost and the static nature of print. What we mean by static nature is that a report gets created, printed, and distributed, but oftentimes that's the end of its life. The cost will be incurred next year when you need to create another report. So this report here is from the City of Minneapolis' program on arts, culture, and creative economy. They did a great job with the visuals. They had a local design firm donate the services. This is the full report that they created for the 2013 data year. And then you can see here that they did an update in 2014, which was much shorter, I think just a couple of pages, but revisited some of their key findings from the 2013 report. And then we can look at the 2012 Houston Arts Alliance report, which effectively communicated the different types of workers making up their creative economy. They did a great job showing workers in creative industries compared to workers in creative occupations. And then for their update in 2014, they actually issued the same report with updated data, but they also provided a landing page on their site with a video and some highlights regarding growth. So some good questions to ask regarding when reporting is the right approach. What generation is my audience, and do they prefer print? Do they need large amounts of information to feel that research is trustworthy, and should a lengthy appendix be included? So moving on to an alternative to a printed report is a research page within your organization's site. Some organizations have a page that is dedicated specifically to their research, which allows for data to be updated and encourages people to interact with it. There are a lot of benefits to this approach, but unfortunately it requires more of an upfront cost to get it off the ground. One benefit of spending the money up front is that the site can then be updated with each new data year. Sustain Arts Michigan, which is what we're looking at here, has a great site that allows you to see and interact with their findings. Another important benefit is when your target audience interacts and has that interactive experience with your narrative, they're more likely to remember it. This creates the opportunity for you to create a lasting impression. So some important questions to ask regarding a research page would be, do we have access to data that can be updated yearly? Do we have the resources to manage a research page? Can we craft a compelling message and visuals with our data? And how often do we need to drive the decision makers to our research, and how varied are the data we're displaying? So we're going to close by taking a look at social media platforms. Publishing information on social media can create many opportunities for organizations when it's done well. Platforms like Facebook and Twitter are particularly good resources for the exchange of information in a casual way. They offer organizations opportunity to engage their audience through regular posts that encourage dialogue. LinkedIn is another good resource to place information about upcoming events. Other platforms can be useful for this, but LinkedIn is a more professional platform, and for certain audiences may be the only way they engage with social media. There are many benefits to engaging with stakeholders in this way. However, there are many challenges also. Promoting posts to your audience is essential to increase traffic, sharing, and have your followers liking your content. It is important to keep in mind that what is worse than having no social media engagement is having an outdated page. Some important questions to ask are, is the audience we want to attract social media savvy? Do we have the resources to maintain a consistent message with timely posts on social media platforms? And can we manage the correspondence with our followers? As economic development occurs differently in each region, it is important to know what is relevant in your region. The 5 aspects of presenting data will help by encouraging you to ask the right questions and have a clear idea of what to do with the answers. The slides and a recording of the webinar will be available on our blog. We will now take some time to answer questions. So thanks so much, Chris, for joining us today and sharing those case studies.
It was great to talk a little bit about what's going on in Oregon.
All right, let's answer some questions. Okay, I have a question here for Chris. Chris, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Great. The question we have that came in was, what are some of the industries that you used in the fashion apparel cluster in the first case study?
Well, we looked obviously at the people who are apparel designers. We looked also at graphic designers. We looked at industrial designers. And I think that those were the main job categories that we started with.
Great. Okay, we have another question here regarding the mapping platforms. Are the mapping platforms you talked about expensive? I can answer that. They have different pricing models. We've worked a little bit with CartoDB, which does have a part of their platform that is free. They have a professional model that they do charge for, but it's a really powerful platform that offers functionality that not a lot of other platforms offer, like the uploading of shapefiles. So we're pretty excited about it here. Another question for Chris. Can you speak to the coalition approach and what challenges you think limit communities from successfully implementing it?
Sure, and I think that there have been a number of successful coalitions that have formed in Oregon and in connecting Oregon to southern Washington. You know, many cultural groups in communities worry about their own turf, their own donors, their own business funders, and they maybe do not take the time to think about how strategic relationships can help them, let's just say, expand their base in their own community. So I think one of the obstacles that at least the people in Bend and certainly the people at the Columbia Gorge overcame was worrying about their own organizational issues and looking forward to what a new, larger group could accomplish with a louder voice in a larger forum.
That makes sense. So the other part of this question too is what types of materials and data were used by the coalition to gain the support of Visit Bend?
I think the first data that they looked at was participation, and obviously they, looking at the group as a whole, they determined that over 1 million events had been presented over the period of a year. And so when an organization like Visit Bend looks for tourism product in the community, in the broader community, the fact that this coalition was creating so much product was instantly valuable to them. I think they also looked at spending. And so when you might look at a small theater doing X in terms of annual spending, but when you take that X and you multiply it by 30, you have real buying power. So the coalition, could spend X for marketing. They could spend X on consultants for promotion. They could spend X on advertising in the paper, which is a major regional newspaper. And then you are a business coalition as well as a cultural coalition. And I think the numbers actually were persuasive for them.
Great. We have another question that came in regarding mapping platforms or data visualization platforms. Can you recommend programs similar to CartoDB that are just about data presentation, not mapping specific? I've heard of Tableau Public, but perhaps there are other good programs for data visualization. So as we mentioned, we're going to send around a link following the presentation that's on our blog, and that link has some more information on it. I've used Infogram for, I think it was just for a bar chart, an interactive bar chart, and I really liked the flexibility with it in terms of being able to modify the design. Plotly is another version or another platform. So my preference is to be able to control design. I have a design background, so I like to choose colors, fonts. So that's sort of what drives my decision is how extensible the platform is and if I can control those factors on it. Okay, we have another question. How do I find regions that are good for comparing against my region? Chris, I'm going to turn that question over to you.
Well, I guess my question would be, what are the characteristics of your region? Are you a Seattle or a Portland or a Sacramento, or are you a Hood River or a Twist or the Dalles? And I think that maybe this could be a question back to WESTAF, and that is, can WESTAF, as it offers CVSuite information to buyers, can you tailor your response to a similarly sized population area?
That makes sense. All right, our final question is just someone asking, so what is CVSuite exactly? CVSuite is our product here at WESTAF. It's a research-based economic development tool that will provide national high-quality creative economy data and reporting. We have Susan's information on screen here. You can chat with her if you have any questions about its capabilities, and she'd be happy to set up a demo for you of the tool. So I think we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much for attending today. Should you have any additional questions, once again, Susan is your contact person. This wraps up our 3-part webinar series on the art of data. Thank you for attending, and we will be having more webinars next spring.